Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad everybody made some time tonight for our Coaching Legends and American Heroes webinar, where we discuss the hottest topics and really interesting thoughts in leadership and culture from the best in the biz. And I am very excited to say that this is actually our first episode where we have two female leaders discussing their tricks of the trade and as what has worked for them for their success in their respective industries. And tonight we have with us Julie Shackford and Kim Killer Chick Campbell. Julie Shackford is the head women's soccer coach at William & Mary. She's a 25-year coaching veteran and former National Coach of the Year. Shackford owns a record of 256, 154 and 39 as a head coach, including stops at Carnegie Mellon and Princeton. Shackford was the head women's soccer coach at Princeton from 1995 to 2014, where she built the Tigers into a consistently successful program that regularly produced championship teams. She is the all-time wins leader at Princeton with 203 and guided the Tigers to an NCAA College Cup semifinal, 6 Ivy League titles, and 8 berths into the NCAA tournament. Julie coached 7 Ivy League Players of the Year, 40 first-team All-Ivy League selections, and 3 United Soccer Coaches All-Americans. Her best season at Princeton came in 2004, where she led the Tigers to their first NCAA College Cup appearance, which remains the only national semifinal trip for any Ivy League member. The team finished the season 19-3. For her efforts, she was named the Division I National Coach of the Year and Soccer Buzz Coach of the Year. She was also an outstanding soccer player herself. Julie was a 4-year standout for the Tribe at William & Mary, where she currently coaches from 1984 to 1987, appearing in 68 career games. She was a 3-time All-American and was elected to the William & Mary Athletics Hall of Fame in 2001. So, Julie, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Incredibly excited to be here. Thank you so much, Harrison and Soldiers to Sidelines. I couldn't be more excited and looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. And before we get it kicked off, we're going to introduce our other guest tonight, Colonel Kim Killer Chick Campbell, most widely recognized for her experience in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Kim Campbell received the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism when the airplane she was flying while supporting ground troops was hit with a surface-to-air missile. She was able to successfully recover her wounded A-10 airplane and recover back to base, a daring feat only accomplished successfully once before. Casey is a distinguished graduate from the United States Air Force Academy. She is a Marshall Scholar with 2 master's degrees, one in business administration from the University of London, and one in international security studies from the University of Reading, England. She is qualified as an instructor pilot and flight examiner in the A-10, a ground attack and close air support aircraft. Her operational assignments include duty as an A-10 test program manager and division commander, director of operations, squadron commander, and group commander. She is a commander pilot with over 1,800 hours in the A-10, including 375 combat hours. She has flown combat missions in Operation Southern Watch, Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom. Based on her extensive experience, Casey spent a year at the Atlantic Council as the Air Force Senior Fellow. She has also served as the military assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Kim is currently the managing director at Victory Strategies. Victory Strategies is a leadership assessment and development firm comprised of elite practitioners such as elite military members, Fortune 500 executives, and high-impact entrepreneurs. They improve organizational culture, alignment, and efficiency through leadership development, training, and team management. So no better than these two amazing leaders to discuss leadership and development. So thanks so much for being here, Casey.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation and learn a little bit from Julie as well.
Awesome. So as we get to this conversation, I'm just going to ask a few questions, and this is going to take on a life of its own. And at any point, if there's questions, just put it in the chat. And I promise we're going to get to those questions as we get to the back half of tonight's Coaching Legends and American Heroes. And my first question is for Coach Shackford. So Coach, you had such tremendous success at Princeton for a long time. You're talking, was that 20, is it 19 years or 20 seasons at Princeton, and you get in your groove, right? You have your culture, you have all of these wins, and you have this return to your alma mater, which has got to be super precious. I mean, it's different. Getting another head coaching job is awesome, but when it's your alma mater, it's just different. So it means a lot. And then you get there and you're about to instill a new culture based on all these 20 years experience you just had at the successful team. What did you do? What were like your immediate characteristics or initiatives that you wanted to instill in your team to start this new culture from the ground up?
I mean, I think it's a great question that probably you can't really answer in the time of a Zoom, but I think it's the third program that I've taken over after William and Mary. It's obviously near and dear to my heart because I am an alum and have recognition with even the current players that were there when I took over. I think anytime you come into a new organization or a new job where you're leading or whatever it might be, I think you have to know who you are, number one. I think that the best coaching advice I ever got from Bob Bradley, who was our U.S. men's national team coach and has coached all over the world, is you have to be yourself. I think you have to know what your values are, and I think you have to know what you want to accomplish when you go into a new program. So even though William and Mary had experienced many successful seasons over the years, I took over from my coach who was in his 70s. And, I think that even though there was some success there over the years, that you have to put your print on the program. So I think, the first thing that we did with our group was, it sounds really businesslike, but we established what our mission statement was. And I'm a firm believer in that. Like, what are we and who are we? And, we talked a lot about the players that have come before because we were one of the first programs in the NCAA in the early 80s. Who are we playing for? What does it mean to put on the jersey? What does it mean to go to the stadium and represent your team every day? Marsha Lycan, who is Holly West's sister, I have to give her props because one of the greatest things she did, and it's tangible, but I think people really held on to it. In every student athlete's locker, we put a sign with every player who came before them that wore their uniform. So now when you walk into the locker room and you see that, Jill Ellis, who won 2 World Cups and played for William and Mary, wore the number 19, and you're walking in having a crappy day from class and you see like, oh my gosh, Jill Ellis is wearing my uniform? Like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go to Soccer Island, which is where we call our practice facility, and I'm going to give it my all. We developed a set of core values, and every kid on our program knows what it means. And did that happen automatically? No. I think we it took a year or so to kind of sit back and see, where our program was and where it needed to go and where we needed to, what were our strengths, what were our weaknesses, and what were our opportunities for improvement or growth. And so we came up with, what we call CAPL. It's commitment, accountability, perseverance, preparation, loyalty, and excellence. And so all of our kids know what it means, but not only what it means, because we can all espouse it and put it up in our locker rooms, but what does it mean to be committed? What does it mean to be accountable? How are we treating the custodian who comes into our locker room? And what does it mean if we're not treating those people the right way? And so I will say it's taken probably 2 to 3 years, and then you have COVID in there to really establish kind of the paradigm for what our culture should look like. And then it's been, obviously, then you put the human element into that. And ultimately, as coaches, I think, we obviously have to know our X's and O's, right? You have to put people in positions where they can succeed, but you have to make a human connection. And I think that when we're talking about our young, student athletes today, our millennials and our my kids and all of your kids, and that they need to know that you care. They need to know, that they're having struggles, or their boyfriend broke up with them, or they didn't get into this class, or and so to have that human connection has really been important for me. And so I would say there's no golden recipe. Like, you can't put all those things in a bowl and stir it up and say, wow, there's our culture, we're going to win. But it's literally a day by day process, and a process which I really, as frustrating and challenging as it is, because we're so close. We get our third recruiting class this fall. I think ultimately, having built two programs, looking back, the process is like, it really is like the gold, because once you get everybody flying in the same direction, that's when you start to win or get everybody on board. So that's a long-winded answer, but
Yes, but it's not, right? Because to your point, like I have like 14 questions right off of that you've just spent 3 years developing. So I want to hear more of that. And it's actually have the same kind of question for you, Casey. But before we even get to that, because I know everybody on this call right now, we just have to address, you have to tell the story of what happened to you while you're in that plane, just so we can just get that out there, and then that could be the backdrop for everything else, because I know everyone's chomping at the bit for that.
All right, fair enough. So there's a little bit of history over the back of my shoulder here, because I've got a piece of my airplane, and actually and the painting in the back is my two ship of A-10s returning from base on April 7th, 2003. Which was about 3 weeks into the war, into Operation Iraqi Freedom. And at that point, our A-10 community was tasked to provide close air support in downtown Baghdad, because at that time, both the Marines and the Army had pushed their way in. And so we were overhead providing close air support. Unfortunately, the weather on April 7th was not great. There was cloud cover all over Baghdad. And so as we were waiting for a call to see if we could support the ground troops, we got kind of the frantic call on the radio that they were taking fire and needed immediate assistance. And so, any A-10 pilot will take additional risk when they hear troops in contact, when they hear that guys on the ground need help. And so we decided that we were going to find our way down below the weather to support the ground troops. I remember as we were just hanging out above the target area, because we had the coordinates in our system, and looked down and couldn't see a whole lot. And then I just watched my flight lead just disappear through the clouds. And then he said, all right, Casey, it's your turn, come on down. And I remember just popping out below the weather, and I could immediately see this firefight. We were lower than I had really ever been in that environment, right over Baghdad. And I could see just flashes and smoke and tracers going back and forth across the river. And then suddenly at about the same time, I start to see these puffs of gray and white smoke and bright flashes now in the air right next to my cockpit. But we had a mission to do. And so we just kept our jets maneuvering, and we decided that we would do a few passes of 30 millimeter and high explosive rockets. Our target was actually underneath the North Baghdad Bridge. And so we needed to be very precise and very accurate to get in there. And then as I was coming off on my last rocket pass, is just when I felt and heard this loud explosion at the back of the airplane. I knew immediately I'd been hit. There was no doubt in my mind. The jet just dumped over. I remember seeing Baghdad below and just the ground getting closer. I remember pulling back on my control stick, and absolutely nothing happened. And I knew that other than ejecting, which is not something that I wanted to do, I had to kind of go through my emergency procedures of trying to figure out what had happened, and quickly trying to analyze. I had this master caution light flashing at me. I had a whole caution panel lit up like a Christmas tree. I looked down at the hydraulic lights and then at the hydraulic gauges, and they were at zero. I mean, the system was totally depleted. I remember looking down at my ejection handles and thinking, not yet. Like, that's the last thing I want to do is eject, right where we had just been engaging the enemy. And so I had to make every second count. I set aside, honestly, my fear and engaged the backup emergency system. And thankfully, the airplane started to climb away from the ground. And that was kind of the first moment where I thought I was actually going to make it out of there alive. And then, now my airplane is somewhat controllable. I've let my flight lead know that I've been hit. And we have to make our way out of Baghdad at that point. They're still shooting at us. So my airplane is not very maneuverable in this backup emergency system. And so we had to make our way home. And I remember my flight lead keying the mic coming over the radio to say that I needed to start thinking about if I wanted to eject or land the airplane, because this backup system that we're in called manual reversion is not something that we train for. We do it once to see how the airplane responds, and we don't actually train to land in the airplane because of the risk associated. So I had an hour to fly the airplane back, about 300 miles back from Baghdad, which is about an hour in the A-10. And I evaluated all the pros and cons, thought about the consequences, and had a very experienced flight lead with me, providing me mutual support, and felt very good about how the airplane was flying, and decided that I would land the airplane. I remember coming into land, and everything at this point seemed to be going fairly smoothly, I guess as good as it could be, right until I came over the overrun, kind of just the back part of the runway, or the front part of the runway, and kind of this half second of where the airplane, I thought it was going to flip over on its back, and there wasn't much I was going to do at that point anyway. And so quickly egged the stick back and then put the airplane on the ground. It's a good thing you played the Top Gun Danger Zone, because I'm pretty sure it was like the Navy carrier power on hard landing to get that airplane on the ground. But I will tell you, it was the best landing I've ever done. It didn't matter what it looked like, but it certainly felt like the best landing that I had ever done. And it was a huge relief to be back on the ground with my team. That's it in a nutshell.
Oh, that's it. Okay. That was an incredible story. And it, needless to say, that had to have just affect your life and your perspective in so many ways. And I'm sure, after you get your bearings, I'm here, I'm okay. And then like things just start to settle. And then as you have reflected on that experience, were there any like epiphanies or existential takeaways that you still carry with you to this day as you lead others? Can you share any of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many lessons from that mission. And, that happened in 2003. I was a fairly new wingman to the squadron. I had just really shown up out of initial training. And so it really set the stage for the rest of my career, in terms of, one, I was able to prove myself in combat. And I think that goes a long way, especially being the only female in the unit, fighter pilot in the unit. So I was able to prove myself that I was credible and capable in the airplane. And but I think, in terms of the biggest lessons, there's so many. One, I did not get home successfully alone, right? I had a wingman that was with me, providing me mutual support. I had my crew chiefs back home who had made sure that airplane could fly. And then there was this entire team that was out there that I didn't really know about. And that I still have people to this day tell me, oh, we were on the ground, we got the call, we were proceeding to the location in case you got shot down. But the rescue helicopters were on alert. I had crash recovery waiting for me back at the base. So there were F-15s overhead that I later learned that were kind of making sure that no other aircraft came in anywhere close to us. So it was a complete team to get me back safely. And my flight lead specifically, when I was hit, all of my attention was on getting that airplane under control. I did not have time to think about anything else. My situational awareness was like right in my cockpit, and that was it. And yet he had the awareness to tell me to put out more chaff and flare so I wouldn't get hit again. He had the awareness to tell me to move west to get over the friendly location. So if I had to eject, I would at least be over the friendly territory or friendly location. And when I was struggling to climb, he told me to emergency jettison all of my ordnance off the airplane. And so he just had that extra awareness that I didn't have. That was that aspect of, it's not about you, it's about the team. And there's a whole team that made me successful that day. I think the other thing, there's many, but I will touch on one other, was one of the questions that I got asked immediately after the mission, debriefed, went into the chow hall, and had one of the other pilots come up to me and told me that I had done a nice job with the landing. But he asked me if I was scared. And I'm like, I'm a fighter pilot, right? I'm invincible. We don't get scared. And I didn't think I really had time to be scared, was my thought. And that was what I told him. And then I went back and listened to the video recording of this because we had it all recorded. And I can hear, I mean, I can tell that I am terrified in that moment. You know, I can hear the fear in my voice. I don't let it take over. I still take action, but I was terrified in that moment. It took me probably, I don't know, it's taken me years, 10 years, 20 years to really fully admit the fact that I was scared in that moment and come to the realization that it's what we do when we are scared that really matters. If people tell you, you know, that they're not scared in those types of incidents, I find it unlikely. But it's really about in those moments of fear, stress, anxiety, worry, not just in flying fighters, but in everything that I've done throughout my career, there have been those moments of fear, anxiety, stress, worry, whether it's leading a squadron or a group or dealing with my kids. You know, in those moments, we can freeze, we can do nothing, or we can take action and do the hard things. And I think that's probably a lesson that I didn't learn at the moment. It's taken me years to really think that one through and realize some of the lessons that I've taken from that.
Profound. And I'm curious to hear how these stories and these two concepts resonate with you, Julie, like on the ball fields now, right? Because I think there's these great parallels between military experience and athletic experience for sure. And there's two things that stood out from Casey's story, right, in her takeaways. And one of them was situational awareness under duress. And how do you approach that with your team to make sure that they are responding most effectively when things are not good?
I mean, first of all, I will say, like, you are such a badass. Like, I could listen to you all day. I'm so impressed with everything that you've done. To me, that when you're telling that story, not only did you believe in yourself, but you had that singular focus. And I think that as a leader, that is so important that you were able to stay in the moment that whole time. And the fact that you relied on a teammate as well. Obviously, we all know when we're coaching teams that that is paramount. You know, that while you were singularly focused on how the heck am I getting this plane down, you had somebody, you know, guiding you a little bit, right? Or facilitating. And I think that it probably ultimately comes down to all the training that you had, right? So that when you get into this scenario, you're able to switch on. And even though you might have trained for different types of scenarios, that you were put in enough environments that you could make the right decisions under extreme duress. Now, let's go to a soccer field. Now, obviously, you can't compare the two on so many levels, but you can. So I would say the same thing, that I'm a facilitator and I put my student athletes in enough, you know, environments on a daily basis that they are able to switch gears in a game, or they're down a goal and they need a goal in 5 minutes and are able to figure out what they need to do, or they need to manage a game with 5 minutes left if they're up 1-0. And so I do think there's a lot of parallels with that piece of it. And I do think it comes down to you as a strong leader with belief in yourself, number one, and that you empower, you know, your group or your team by putting them in the right environments till they can't get it wrong. You know what I mean? And obviously you can't, I'm not sure the word I'm looking for. You can't account for every little difference, right? And especially when you're in combat, like, you know, there's so many variables, right? But you were like the singular focus you have that day. You must look back at yourself and like on a certain level, like it's like a surreal out of body experience. Like that woman was amazing and stuck to a plan and got it done. And so I do think there's parallels. Yes.
Harrison, if I can just jump in a second, I love what Julie said, because when I look back at why I was successful in that moment, it's because of everything that happened prior to that. It's preparation. It's, you know, knowing what happens when my aircraft was hit. It's the practice that goes into it, whether that's in the simulator or visualization. We call it chair flying in the pilot community, where we actually think through critical steps. And then it was planning for contingencies and thinking about those things that could go wrong. And so I see that I've taken that concept outside of the cockpit as well. I use it in my personal and professional life when I have something coming up that's stressful or I'm worried about, putting in the work, preparing, doing all the research, practicing, visualizing, thinking through things, and then kind of thinking about what are the worst case scenarios? What are those things that could go wrong? I think about them, I have a plan to deal with them, and then I put them away because I need to focus and kind of have that positive mindset. But I can see that, I can see that same thing. I certainly have not coached at that level. I've coached like 5-year-olds and 6-year-old soccer, which is a totally different experience. But I think the idea of preparing for something and practicing and planning for contingencies is huge. No matter what you're doing, if you're prepping for a game, you're prepping for a presentation or a briefing with a boss, I think it's all about the effort that we put in prior to that experience.
Awesome, Casey. And so what I want to now learn is, how do you get your players or the folks that you lead to buy into that, right? So when I hear that story, yeah, you have bought into that 100%, and that led to your success. So I know sometimes even in my coaching experience, I have to sell that sometimes to my players. Not everybody is self-motivated to understand that bigger picture. So from either of you, what are some strategies to get some of your players to buy into the importance of this preparation, so that, because like right now, if everything is safe, everything is fine, nothing's wrong, how do you get them to buy in fully so that they are prepared in these adverse situations? Julie, you want to try to take a stab at that? Like if there's anything that you're doing explicitly? Oh, muted.
Sorry. After all these
Okay.
years, I still am always on mute. I think that, first of all, I'm pretty lucky that I've been at, I went to William & Mary, then at Carnegie Mellon, Princeton, and William & Mary. So I'm dealing with like a highly motivated population, right? So I'm very lucky in that way. I think that, like I said before, you have to know who you are. You have to be confident in your ability and your X's and O's. And I think kids have to know that you know what you're doing, but also that you're connecting, like I said earlier. I think in terms of getting your message across, it doesn't happen in a day. It does take some time, but it's about building relationships. But I have also found in my now almost 30 years of coaching that, the most successful groups that we've had are led from within. Meaning, like, I think there's that Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, like I think it was him or Walt Whitman that said, like, the ultimate goal is for the students to overthrow the teacher, right? So you get buy-in from either a leadership group or captains and you teach them how it's supposed to look on the field, off the field, when we're traveling, when we're going to class, we don't wear our hat backwards, like all these different pieces of your program, and you teach them, and then they peer teach. And I think peer teaching is so valuable. And so, you start off as a kindergarten cop when you first start leading, there's no doubt, because you've got some kids flying the other way, and you've got to figure out a way to get them all flying in the right direction. And so, I think that you have to use some discipline. You have to have some, heart-to-heart talks. You have to do a lot of individual work. But ultimately, I think it comes from within your group that your leaders have bought in, and now they can teach the rest. And that's not to say that there's conflict when you have 30 women, all vying for 11 spots on the field. But that to me is one of the ways that, our process has allowed us to move forward.
Wonderful.
I think one of the other things, I believe very strongly in connection. I think it's important that you create a relationship with your team, that you create an environment where they trust you. And I think that it goes a long way. And part of that is, I think, on the leader to create that connection first, put yourself out there and be vulnerable, be willing to have that human connection, share about yourself, and then find out what your team values, where they struggle. I think this is very similar to what Julie was talking about in the beginning. I think that human connection is really important in creating that environment of trust with your team where they're going to trust your decisions and your actions. The other thing that I think is really important, and I know a lot of people don't always associate with this with the military, but I also think it's important that if you're doing, whatever it is in terms of preparation, you explain the why behind it. You give the purpose and the reason for what you're doing. And yes, there are moments and there's times where you may not have the time for that. But I think if you can sit down with a team and explain the why behind something, it helps create buy-in. They may not always like it, but at least it helps them understand a little bit about your decision-making process. But I think it's just part of it is just that human connection, being open and honest with people and sharing, and creating trust with your team.
Certainly. And I think that's important, but that can also be scary when you're taking over a new program. So even if it is your alma mater, Julie, and you've done this a few times, connecting for the first time, at least I feel sometimes there's a little bit of, are they accepting me? Like, am I connecting? And Casey, it sounds like you're going through that right now because you've just recently transitioned out of the Air Force, and now you're in this new leadership position in a leadership company. So how has that been going for you? If you don't mind being a little bit open and vulnerable right now as you are in. So has it been 8 months since just 8 months ish?
Yeah. Public math, something like that.
Yeah. So it's within a year. So it's still pretty recent. And as you're going through that, what are some things that you've been doing to connect, and how has this transition period influenced like your leadership practice in this next evolution of your life?
I think I go back to kind of some principles that I've learned throughout my time as an A-10 pilot. And one of the things that we talk about is being humble, approachable, and credible. I think when you walk in somewhere new with some humility and know that you don't have all the answers, despite whatever you've done in the past, you're still new to an organization and you need to take the time to learn and listen before doing just about anything, to listen first and find out, about your new team and learn from them and learn about the people. I also think, the other part of that is being approachable, just welcoming people, getting to know people. And then credibility goes a long way too. I mean, people knowing your background and where you've done, and it's about, to me, putting in the work to be good at what you do. So I think I've taken that and tried to use that same concept throughout my time, just in different jobs in the military. My final job in the military was as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development at the Air Force Academy. And I went in that director position during the middle of the pandemic. I didn't know all of the people. It was a struggle trying to get to know people in this, the virtual environment. But I tried to go in with that same idea of just learning and listening first, finding where people were struggling and what their pain points are. And so I've tried to do that as I transitioned out of the military. I find that a lot of the things that we learn in the military transition very, very well. And I think sometimes veterans tend to underestimate all the things that we've learned, whether it's teamwork or problem solving complex problems, knowing how to keep a team together, knowing how to build a team. All of those things translate. But I've also found that you can't just walk into an organization and try to change it right away. It's all about, that humility coming first, I think, and then taking those things you learn and bringing that fresh perspective. So it goes back to being humble, approachable, and credible.
Yeah, and I hear Julie, taking that approach as well. If that, at least that's what I'm hearing as you speak, Julie. And I want to know, as you do that, have you had any like individual players challenge you, especially early on? So like both of you have like these incredible resumes, and these credentials and these accolades and all this stuff. And then you're in this new culture that you're starting from the beginning, but those players were already there. Um, are there any instances where you felt like that was challenged? Kind of testing the waters with you, like the testing your authenticity, coach, right? Like, uh, and when you had those experiences, how did you handle them if you've had them?
I mean, I've been pretty lucky. I haven't had too many, but of course, you're always going to get a few. And I think over 30 years of coaching, you know, I would say that when I first started off as a young coach at 22, that, I had a couple parents that were actually more problematic than the student athletes. And I shut them down. One of them was like a pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. And I had about 8 calls with him about, his daughter should be playing and this and that. And of course, parents only see the game. They don't see practice. They don't see the day to day. And so I challenged him. I said, look, like, I want you to come to practice for a week and I want you to watch. He never did end up taking me up on it, but I never heard from him again. And, then I made a rule going forward that I really can't hear from your parents unless it has to do with academics or health reasons. But I think, like, look, I think your naysayers give you opportunities to either grow or reflect or get feedback, right? Because, you'd be stupid to think that everyone's agreeing with everything that you're doing. It just doesn't work that way. So I think that for all, there's always a couple that, I just always approach it head on. Like, I'm one of those people that just likes to get right at it. And so I would bring people in and talk to them and, ask them. And a lot of it's playing time or, I didn't like the way you handled this or whatever. But I'm a heads, face to face, bring them in. And again, like Kim said, they might not always like what you have to say, but at least they have an idea where you're coming from. It shows that you respect their viewpoint or attitude and then you try to come to some kind of middle ground. Like, okay, you're not playing. Well, here's your development plan. This might not get you on the field right away, but it's going to get you closer, and they call me Shacks, and Shacks, like, you're calling me out way too much in practice and it's making me, I feel like it's in my head. Okay, well, look, I'm going to start pulling you aside. So I think you kind of try to come to the middle because, these are players that are going to be there for 4 years. And I always impress upon them, like, when they come in that door their freshman year, I say, what is your legacy going to be? It starts today. And so throughout their roller coaster of being a student athlete, and many on the call have been student athletes at the high school or college level, you don't it's your time is short. And so I think approaching those things head on has been the best way for me to deal with them.
So fantastic. And hearing you, the way you describe that, you are approaching that situation head on, but you're not like ramming into it. You said, okay, you heard your player, you're calling me out too much in practice. So you want to address it, but you're also going to say, okay, she's telling me it's better for me to handle her if I just pull her aside and do that. And you are willing to do this. And in so many instances, I know, especially in male sports, male coaches not always tend not to do that. This is the way I coach them hard. And, and sometimes that falls under the misconception of authenticity. Like, I'm being who I am. This is how I do it. But that was just a beautiful gem of wisdom of how you handle that head on, but not like with blunt force trauma.
I also think that as you evolve as a coach, I was probably a lot harder when I first started. And I think you are trying to imprint what you think is the right way, or you've watched coaches who have gone before you have been more autocratic or whatever. And then you start to realize, like, you need all of these kids to be with you and how important that is. And it's less about a hierarchy and more about how can we all do this together.
Certainly. So Cornelia Weiss, I'm so happy you're here tonight. It's been a while since we've seen you, and I'm just pumped you're here. And you have a question. If you feel comfortable, would you like to unmute yourself and ask Casey your question?
Sure. Thank you very much. So I have a question for both participants, and I hope I get to ask both of those. But for Casey, one of the things that I think is always interesting is, when does a military person know, quote, when to quit, right? When to go on to the next chapter in their life. So I'm wondering how did you arrive at the decision that now is the time for you to leave the military rather than to stay in? Because I think we also have an issue with loyalty, right? And feeling like we might be betraying the institution by leaving. And then for Shax, how do you make sure that your athletes don't overtrain? So thank you very much.
It's a very good question. I will tell you that I wasn't very good at retiring, because I attempted retirement 3 times before it actually stuck. I finished out group command at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. I was responsible for about 1,000 military and civilian personnel throughout South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, which was an awesome job, but it meant a lot of travel. My husband at the time was the wing commander at Davis-Monthan, meaning he was responsible for the entire base. And he was busy. Our kids were 2 and 6, 3 and 7, somewhere in there. And it was a struggle. I mean, that job was an incredible struggle. I love the job. We both loved our jobs, but it took its toll on our family. And so we made a decision at that point that we were going to step away from kind of the command track and the fast pace. And the Air Force initial response at the time for me was that if I wasn't going to stay on the command track, then I needed to retire. And so I decided, all right, my family is most important. At the end of the day, I want my family standing by my side. And so I made the decision to retire. And then the Air Force, they changed the policy and decided that I could stay in. At about the same time, I got an opportunity to go back to the Air Force Academy to teach and help the next generation of leaders, which was pretty much a job that I could not turn down. And Scott was able to come with me. We both went to the Air Force Academy, and it was really about a greater purpose of helping the next generation while also spending more time with our family. And then after about 2 years of that job, I really felt like it was time. I was in a great job. I loved the job, but I really wanted more time with my kids and more time with my family. And it was tough, because I did feel, there is that quit mindset of like, there's so much I could still do in the Air Force, but at the same time, my heart wasn't in it anymore because of the time that I had spent away from my family and just wanting to be around more as the kids grew older. And so I tried to retire one more time, and then got a call from the superintendent of the academy asking if I would stay one more year to be the director for the Center for Character and Leadership. And if there was one job in the Air Force I couldn't turn down, that was it, because I really am passionate about helping in the next generation and helping the next generation to be leaders. So I wasn't really great at retirement, and it was a constant battle for me in terms of deciding what the right answer was. But I think when it really came down to it, could I still keep going and get promoted? Yes. Was my heart in it? No. My kids didn't want to move, so that was a non-starter. They've moved plenty of times. They're ready to be stay put, and are very happy here in Colorado. So it really came down to a family decision for me. And, I don't know that there is ever really any right time to make the decision. You just make the best decision you can and choose your own path, because there will be plenty of people that try to give you advice and sway you and think that they have a better idea of what goes on in your family life. I heard a lot of times that kids are resilient, they can get through it. There is truth to that, I think, to a point. And then, in reality, nobody else lives the life that I do at home with my family, other than my husband. And we made the choice that was right for us. So still a difficult decision. I miss some things, but there are plenty that I don't. And it's all about finding your new purpose and passion. And for me, that's been sharing messages and sharing stories and sharing some of those experiences. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question, because it took me 3 times to get it right.
Well, you were so good at what you did, so I can understand the draw and their draw for wanting you back. And just before you go on, just the whole balancing that you talk about, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and balance is not really, you can't have balance, but it's really like trying to live where you are for that moment, whether it's with your family or at work, and being present for each of those pieces in your life. But that all resonates with me as I have 3 children as well. But the overtraining thing, I think, I started coaching back in the early 90s, and I would see kids doing extra running around campus, and so I think way back then for me it was more an eye test, like if I saw them tired in practice or they seemed down, like there's definitely like physical symptoms that you would see over time. And I think that because I've always had high achieving kids, they always want to grip too hard. More is better. Go run 5 miles. I'll be better at soccer. They just don't correlate that all. So I think it's really education, and teaching them that sometimes less is more. And now we've got metrics. So now, I have a high performance team, and I'm a mid-major Division I school. And so I don't even have as many things as the Power 5 schools do. But we ask the athletes in a daily rate of perceived exertion survey, like how hard was practice. And then every day they wake up and have to fill out a what's your tribe vibe, which is basically, how did you sleep? How did you eat? How do you feel? What's your mood? And all these kinds of things. And then we watch how they perform. Our trainer talks to us. Our high performance coach talks to us. So they really have a whole team. An academic person talks to us. So it's really not left to me entirely. But I think most of them have seen how overtraining can hurt them. And so for me, it's been pretty easy to show them that. Because they see the physical and sometimes mental pieces of it, if that makes sense.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Great question, Cornelia, and great answer. When I hear you talk about that, Julie, I just think of all the planes surrounding KC, making sure that she comes home for a safe landing. And really, that's what this is doing. You have these team of people that your players are now relying on to make sure that they stay safe and can continue to compete. Man, that's really cool hearing that. So, are there any other questions from anybody tonight? Because we've already learned so much. If you do, just put it in the chat. And as you do that, let's I'll turn the mic back over to you, Kim, if you want to just address the group one last time while questions come in, and then any parting words from you as well, Coach Shackford.
I'll just touch on something when Julie talked about balance. That's something I've struggled with, my entire career, is that balance between your personal and professional life. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I don't think there's any one right or wrong way. For me, what I tried to do is find balance over the long term. If I was trying to find balance, 50-50 every day, it just wasn't possible. And so I try to find a long-term balance of, and like Julie said, being present in the moment as best you can, even if that's at work. We talk a lot about compartmentalizing in the airplane when, there are a lot of competing factors, family, work, whatever, you name it. But in the airplane, I have to be totally focused on flying. And so we do a lot of talk about compartmentalizing. And that's been something that has helped me try to be in the moment, compartmentalize, and then really focus on the task at hand. But I try to look at balance as a long-term perspective. When I was deployed, my balance wasn't so good for months at a time. And so trying to make up for that. And I see a question I think I can read and respond at the same time. How did you feel getting back in the cockpit after your A-10 was hit, and what did you mentally do to prepare for that moment? The truth is I didn't mentally prepare, because then I got back in the cockpit the next day, and it wasn't really intentional. One of our other missions in the A-10 is combat search and rescue. And on April 8th, so the day after this mission, I got put up to sit combat search and rescue alert with my same flight lead. And I'm pretty sure the intent was for us to just chill, have a down day, relax, because that's usually what you do when you sit alert. You hang out in the alert check next to the runway. There's really nobody to bother you. You read, relax, you sleep. On April 8th, the alarm sounded because an A-10 pilot had been shot down near Baghdad. And, I didn't have time to think about it. We just ran, we hauled our ass out to the jets, got our gear on, and hopped in the jets and took off, and trying to gather information. Where was the pilot? What shot him down? What was his condition? Where were the helicopters to come in and get him? We made it about 30 minutes into Iraq, and we're told that we could turn around. It turns out he had been picked up by friendly ground troops. So I didn't have time to think about it. I didn't have time to think about the fact that I was going right back to Baghdad, right where I had escaped my own, possible shoot down. But the truth is, those guys were there for me the day before, and I was going to do everything to be there for them. So from a mental perspective, I did nothing to prepare for it. I think I was still in the, adrenaline letdown from what had happened the day before. But, once that alarm sounded, it was just the adrenaline picked right back up and got back into it, which I think was the best way for me to get back into it. And if I'm honest, I didn't really deal with that whole situation until after I came home. Back to the compartmentalizing thing, it was just something that I needed to unpack later and think about once I got home. But good question.
Certainly. And there's another question for you, Coach Shackford.
I saw it. Yeah. It's a question about mental health, and we've had a number of suicides in the last month, even 2 in the last 3 days. I think a Towson football player and a Northwestern soccer player. And then the Stanford goalkeeper who committed suicide a few weeks ago. Look, I would say that I think I think kids are way more anxious than they were when I was growing up. I think they're hit with social media. They can YouTube like war, like the whole Russia Ukraine conflict is on social media, right? So they have all these things coming at them. So they're more anxious, they're more stressed, and then you put COVID on top of it. And I do think that we're dealing with a really stressed, for my population, a really stressed out group. And I think it's incumbent upon leaders, like we spend a lot of time on mental health and organizations to really educate about mental health, because I think a lot of student athletes, like who eventually come to me, think they're alone, and they feel either prideful or embarrassed, or like, how can I be feeling this way when I've got, I'm at a great school and I'm doing well in the field and I'm doing great in the classroom. And so I think like getting those kids to understand that has nothing to do with, how you're feeling mentally. And it's a great question. And it's really scary when you think about, somebody like the goalkeeper at Stanford, who ostensibly looked like she was having the time of her life and doing everything well. And so I think it's always in the back of our minds. And especially with COVID, I think that we've been more attuned to it. And I think, all of us are leaders, right? We all have we might not be a leader of a group or leader of an organization, but you might be the leader of your family or the leader of your, Tuesday night golf group or your tennis team, whatever it might be, that, everyone has a leader inside of them. And I think that, the whole mental health piece, is a really big challenge, and one that my school has taken on head on. And I think student athletes will push back when they think things are provoking anxiety or depression. So that, I don't have the answers, but we do a lot of education and talking and putting it out in the open.
Awesome question. And then we just have one last one for you, Coach. Colin, you want to just unmute yourself real quick and ask your question?
Yeah, sure can. Hey, and just to your point, Coach, about mental wellness, in the special operations community, our performance psychologists over the last 20 years have been kind of studying PTSD and things like that. They've got some incredible insights that based off their findings, I suspect we might be moving in the wrong direction on some of this stuff. I mean, we should really be aiming for resilience. And that actually kind of goes towards my question about failure. So, how often do we get 100% on a test? How often do we win a game without making any mistakes, right? The winner of the Super Bowl, they made plenty of mistakes, but not a sufficient number to lose. And I think that's the reality is failure is baked into everything, whether that's a win or a loss. So before you can ever talk about success and strategies for that, I think you have to have a healthy attitude towards failure. So my guess is that at the level your athletes are performing, they all kind of have that. I'm wondering, how do you help them interpret their failures, their setbacks, so they can manage that in a healthy way? Or
Gosh, that's brilliant, because I think resilience is the tool that, ultimately we're all trying to, as leaders, to provide for me, young women. And it is incredible to see how they grow from 18 to 22, just with experience, right? But I think again, it's like that thing, you treat everybody the same, but everybody differently. Like it's very complex and nuanced. And I think that one kid's failure, like I'll use an example on my team. I won't name her, but like she can't play as a last defender because she cannot have the stress of being a last defender. And when she gets beat, it's like the end of the world. And I'm not trying to minimize that, because, that's really a first world problem, but it affects her and how she goes about her day and what she thinks about herself, And so I think, so I'm there to help provide perspective. And, in every failure, there's an opportunity to grow and change, and that failing is great. Like it's an opportunity, right? You're exactly right. You have to have both sides of the coin to be able to ultimately succeed. And I do think that building resilience, whether that's failing a lot and being okay with it and teaching kids to do that, or, just, that's a part of your plan. I always say to my kids, like, if you knew everything, and if you were perfect, there'd be no reason to have sports, right? Like sports is predicated on mistakes, right? It's that's the way sports operate, and it's why it's such a great microcosm for life. So I can't answer it like exactly, but I do think it's an individual thing, and helping to give perspective, and and trying not to let them, take it into other parts of their life. Like, let's take this little pimple on the elephant's ass, which I like to call it, and shrink it down and think about, like, well, how can this help you? But I do think the idea of resilience, and I'd love to know, like, I think that research is really important, because I do think that that's a piece that a lot of our kids are missing. And I will say, at some of the high elite institutions, I think a lot of these kids coming in have always been told they're good at everything, haven't failed at anything, and then they get to college and I'm telling them they're not as good as they think they are. So I think it's my job to teach them, like, resilience and how to fail, and then how to grow from there. So that doesn't really answer it, but a little insight anyhow.
I think that was a great response, and I also think that's a wonderful message to end on. Right, like, let's understand that we all don't know everything. It's impossible to know all the answers to all the information in the world. The best part about sports and life is we live in a world of failure, and if we can just embrace it, we're always growing, right? And we're just so grateful to have two tremendous leaders like you, Casey, and like you, Coach Shackford, to be living out your example, to make this world a better place. So just thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you, everybody, for being on the call tonight. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed Coaching Legends and American Heroes as much as I did. Be on the lookout for the next one. Follow us on social media where we start to really post when we're doing these things. And if anyone's into basketball, we have a basketball coaching certification coming up here in April. So would love to see you there. Good night, everyone.